I have been glad to be here for the last few days this week in the new North Pole. Now, I'm located in Coral Gables, so being way down in the subtropics, we usually refer to anything north of Fort Lauderdale as the frozen north. And then it turned out this week was actually the first coast. It was actually true. I couldn't believe it. Now look how charming your first coast towns can be, even in the craziest of weather, right? Oh, that's the only AI joke, I promise this. I have the best job in the world. I get to travel around the country and help communities figure out what they want to be when they grow up. And we sometimes refer to that as being in the before and after business. If you just think about the cities that we have and then the cities that we want instead, before and after. The before and after business is really just helping people visualize change before it occurs, so that then they can feel confident about making things better rather than worse. Now, that's sometimes work we do for developers, sometimes we're doing that kind of work for local governments, but they all want to find the place that they've inherited and figure out how to change it into the place they'd rather have. That's fundamentally what it's all about. I call that visualizing change before it occurs. Think about that. Making pictures of places that don't quite exist yet, but probably should or could. Almost always that involves rekindling interest in good urban design. And it turns out that's the one thing we can least afford to do without. If you want to make places where people want to be, that simply requires good design. And that means good design at the big picture and in the details. I'll just give you a little story about Panama City here. Some of y'all probably followed this, but I'm describing this work so you know where my head is at. So you'll see why I'm so optimistic about your town. And we can get into some nitty-gritty about neighborhood design and city planning and street design as we do that. And sometimes this work takes place against the backdrop of challenges, whether it's controversy or catastrophe. And we were grateful to have the chance to help Panama City after Hurricane Michael smashed into their region just a few years ago. And the comeback of that place has been amazing to watch. They had suffered a 50-year decline in downtown Panama City before the storm. So downtown was just a lonesome, dusty, windswept place with boarded up storefronts. And this was years before the storm. So basically they had forgotten about their downtown and let its economic power leak out into the hinterlands. But now they've turned the lights back on. It's a pretty amazing thing to see. And their historic core is vibrant again. It's safe. It's full of people. There are little kids drawing pictures on the street in chalk. Can't believe it. And it's become the spot where all the TV news crews go to start their live segments. They never did that before, trust me. And teenagers are going there to get their prom photographs, and bridegrooms are getting on their knees and making marriage proposals. It turns out it's the most Instagrammed spot in Bay County. Trust me, before the revitalization started, nobody was standing along or in the street, much less taking pictures of life's big moments in that location. So in this work, in our practice, we draw a lot of pictures. And the reason for it is because we think the biggest challenge we have facing this generation, especially in Florida, is that our people, our citizens, our neighbors have, for a long time now, been suspicious of growth and change. They're pretty sure you're going to make growth and change that makes things worse rather than better. But we need to rekindle confidence that growth and change can make things better rather than worse. Development done well builds scenery, I choose the word on purpose, and charm. And design is the key to that. And we could add to our population and add to our economic prosperity and add to our happiness and also up our game on our environmental stewardship, growing our way out of all of our problems. So more on that in a minute, but first, a pop quiz. A pop quiz lightning round. I want you to name some of the biggest things you own. Just think fast. Wyatt, name the biggest thing you own? A house, okay. Trudy, what's the biggest thing you own?
My truck.
Your truck, okay. These are good answers. Bigger, almost as big as his house. Give me another one. The big thing you own. What do you own? Okay. Anybody own a refrigerator? Those are pretty big. Washing machine? These are all good answers. They are all, of course, absolutely wrong. The biggest thing you own is the streets in Jacksonville. The public realm between our private buildings. Biggest, by far, the biggest things you own. You own them. And because you own them, you can insist that they get the attention they deserve. These expensive assets you own, that you're a shareholder in, should get the attention they need so that they can appreciate and value in every sense of that word. Now, I've been coming to Jacksonville off and on since 1968. As a 6-year-old, I swam back and forth in the rooftop pool in the Hotel Roosevelt downtown. And every time I come, it's been inspiring and fun and interesting to watch the evolution. So looking back at your proud town, during the year I had to think about what to say to you since that invitation from Nancy a year ago. It's telling me something about that evolution. And here it is. How did this place get here? I have a theory. I have a theory about this place. And that theory is that not all that long ago, a great city building civilization built this town. They started the settlement. They incorporated everything they had learned, or that had been learned from the preceding 5,000 years of human experience in building towns. And in this new world, they set out to create one of the best ever, one of the best they could possibly make. They set their aims very high. And even in pictures from the pioneer times, there are clues as to how they were thinking. This picture is 1870. You've probably seen it before in the Historical Society collection. From the beginning, they said, this is a city. It's not a little low-slung golf course subdivision or a one-story strip shopping center. Okay, this is city. That's what they said, and they meant it. And so they laid a pattern on the land. And you can see in this picture, let's say, this map, let's say, a pattern. See this grid of streets on the left? This pattern. And even at the stage scene here, when it was not yet fully filled in, at that point, they said, okay, this is the system, and we're going to let 1,000 flowers bloom. Many, many people can make their own individual creative entrepreneurial contributions, large and small. And we'll get enough guidance out of the patterns, that the wise pattern that we put down on the land, that it can all hang together so that the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. Now, here's Bay Street in 1872. It's starting to get a little more serious. The street is still dirt. And here, 3 years later. This photo shows it right at the beginning stages, when the streets themselves were still mud, when they were just getting started, but the buildings were urban, and they were cityfied, and they stood up straight, upright, and they were mixed use, and they were dense and tall and proud. Within all the variety, all the different things that are going on there, the crucial building-to-street relationships between the private investment and the public spaces between them were getting set, and they were there from the very beginning. The street was like a public room. You'll often see urban designers do this. It's all about the U. Teach at the University of Miami. The urban designers do this. The street, building height to street width, has a proportion, right? The street is like a public room, and that's our common ground. It's the organizing element within all that variety. As the city grew, they were knitting in areas like San Marco and new streetcar suburbs like Riverside and then Avondale. They continued this pattern. They would pull the components of town together. Now, there are old fire insurance maps called Sanborn maps that are fun to look at. This is the Jacksonville of yesterday. They're pretty revealing. You should know maps are to planners like x-rays are to doctors. Okay? Just zoom in on one of them here for a second. In these old maps, these are pink. The pink here is for commercial and mixed-use buildings. These are buildings like the ones you saw in the old black and white photographs of Bay Street. So look how, even back when the whole peninsula of our state must have seemed like open space, and land was incredibly cheap, they deliberately clustered them tightly together for mutual benefit. The buildings here are all different. They're different depths, they're different architecture, different size, height, different uses inside them. But they did line up along the street in a kind of agreement. And then when you look over at the residential examples, say here's a fledgling residential area where this is where La Villa meets Brooklyn. When it was just filling in, they had a basic pattern, a network or web of streets, which they intended to be great streets, addresses that you would covet and want to be part of. And then the buildings were generally arrayed along them, many different sizes, right? But pushed forward usually so that their front porches were within conversation distance of the sidewalk and connected directly to places to work and to main streets. Here's that same area today, and of course streets being the slowest of human institutions to change. Most of those streets are sitting right where they laid them, right? This is our inheritance. There, of course, when we compare that same area, there's a lot of lost space now. It's just being filled back in after all those traumas of highway building and slash and burn urban renewal programs and so on. And you can still see the street pattern, and you also see the proximity to things other than your home is being reestablished. Proximity. As we learned from Business Insider, the key to happiness is being within walking distance of a coffee shop. It's a big deal these days in real estate. But from the beginning, as you saw in the old maps, your town founders were setting up these patterns for future success in these kind of classic, time-tested ways. Now, while your great city-building civilization was doing that, you were not alone here in Jacksonville. I'll just use as an example Montgomery, Alabama. Emerging cities in that time period, like Montgomery, and even small towns like Fernandina Beach, they were doing this too. They had architecture that was as good as that produced by the fancy firms in New York and Chicago. Americans were getting pretty good at this stuff. These Americans, your great-grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers, during a time when, as a country, we were, as the saying goes, poorer but smarter, they got really good at building towns. They were as good at it and as committed to it as London or Rome ever were. And in the New World, the classic example, the oldest example being St. Augustine, we had something to prove here. And did we ever prove it with the cities that we built? Our main streets and our garden streets, it's the Garden District in New Orleans, our harbor towns, our market towns, from coast to coast, were designed to provoke this pride of place. That's how they were set up. Now, like Panama City after the hurricane, Jacksonville had its challenging moments. The photos, if you haven't seen them, of the city in 1901 after the fire are truly heartbreaking. You know, it's just amazing what was going to happen now. They had lost so much in the fire. So here's 1903. What did they do? They picked themselves up and they dusted themselves off and they set off on building the place that they really wanted. And while they were doing all this, there were a few things that were consistently true as they did so. The overarching one is this, that they deliberately brought people and businesses and homes and congregations and schools and visitors and civic life close together, life within walking distance. Of course, as it was within towns for millennia, that was the normal thing. I want to compare that to what zoning usually looks like. Let's back that up one. You may have to give that a nudge. Give it a click. There you go, forward. One more. No, okay. So zoning usually takes those components of the town and pushes them farther apart. You know, farther and farther apart. The homes farther from the workplaces, the civic life farther from both of those, the retail somewhere else. And you know, they assume that we will be okay if we just keep pushing them and keep pushing them, because people will just drive everywhere, every time, right? And no matter how far, for everything, every time. So what's really needed now is for us to recover the skill in putting things together by design. So I will start with neighborhoods, because I think it's a good place to start. The first things that was consistently true in your great city building civilization was that neighborhoods, compact, complete, connected neighborhoods of the kind that Brian was describing, were the basic building blocks of the city plan. And sometimes that's called traditional neighborhoods. You may hear it called T&D, because we love acronyms. You may hear it called smart growth or the new urbanism. But these are just, by all these names, they have a few things that are just pretty consistently true, which is that trying to create the walkable, convenient, connected, and valuable places. The next thing that was true was that over and over in that period, we would find street-oriented architecture. And that doesn't sound radical, does it? That we should put the fronts of buildings facing streets? I know there are some of my friends from architecture school in the room. Please don't drum me out of the fraternity for saying this. But no matter what the architects tell you, buildings in the real world almost always have a front side and a back side, and the front is what goes toward the street. Can we agree on this? Okay. That was the custom, street-oriented architecture, just a few blocks away in this example, and it's not hard to understand where the front of that building is it? Over by Memorial Park. Street-oriented architecture is just crucial for a walkable neighborhood, because we don't want to walk by blank walls, and we don't want to walk by parking lots or loading docks. We do want to walk by storefronts and front porches and doors and windows and balconies. Does that make sense? You need to realize, though, that our built environment is the result of a whole mix of rules and regulations and patterns and habits, in the same way that DNA controls the growth of living organisms. So if we can fix the DNA of development, we can also save our cities. Now, my list of things that seem to have been consistently true includes parks and public spaces. This third thing that was always true is that in addition to the neighborhood forms and the architecture forms, the city building society I'm describing vigorously pursued the creating of great parks. Now, that's because the city planning history, the history of city planning as a profession, is tied up with the green parts too. Promoting public health and propelled the parks movement in this country from grand parks at the center of regions to the fine public squares or the small village greens or the neighborhood park. And guess what? We can see this here too. Right here in Jacksonville, just a couple of blocks away. What a fitting photo for a night with Scenic Jacksonville, Nancy. Your ancestors built your scenery. They built your scenery up in our field of vision where we could see it. Not just in the open to the sky spaces, but also, notably, in the back of the picture there, in the architecture that frames and shapes those spaces. Remember that during the Florida booms of the past, that's exactly what they sold here. They built these systems of parks and Great Gatsby architecture and streets and trolleys and train stations, all to showcase our weather and the healthful environment of Florida. And what they sought to do was to elevate the experience of those who came here. That's what a train station should look like, by the way. And not just in the big moves. Big moves are like Memorial Park or grand avenues like Riverside Avenue. It's also the little things. I love the streets, how they are in Riverside and San Marco, where they open to the water views at the ends. And I love that tiny little park at the end of Cherry Street. Tiny things, but look at what a difference. And of course, everyone on that street and everyone in that neighborhood feels a sense of ownership of the waterfront and the ability to share in it. Now, to match up with those parks and all that privately produced beauty that I described, the city builders also built proud civic buildings. They were intended to basically send a message about the importance and dignity of the institutions inside. Do you all recognize this building? Okay. What a city hall should look like. The fourth consistent truth is an attitude really about the streets that surround all of these components. The streets were public spaces. Urban designers refer to the spaces between buildings as the public realm. That's kind of funny, jargony term, isn't it? But it might be in the heart of town, or it might be on a leafy residential street, but what's between the buildings matters. And that's where the memories and impressions are formed, and where the story of your town is communicated. It's what sets the brand. And it matters a whole lot more than how many square feet are in the buildings, or what the density is in dwelling units per acre, or what the parking ratio is. Streets, so in a leafy residential street example, just to contrast with the downtown one. Streets tell us a lot of things. They send us messages. They tell us where we are and when we are, what's going on. Now, one last thing from my list. From 1870, more or less, to 1925, 26, Florida cities were expanding at their edges. And the great example, of course, here is Avondale. Adding on and building on the success of what Riverside had already accomplished. That's one sort of national caliber example. But while Avondale was happening here, places like Forest Hills Gardens in New York, or St. Francis Wood in California, or Coral Gables, where I am, or in Beverly Hills, they were also growing. And what they had was this really compelling idea about uniting the green and gray parts of cities, the garden suburb and the garden city. They wanted to build places where people would want to get to know their neighbors, and where they'd want to hang out, as I know I'm showing you pictures of places that you all hang out. You didn't get beloved places like Avondale or San Marco from Santa Claus. You inherited them from people who designed them to be that way. They put into them the things that we now find so likable. And they knew how to do this here. They knew how to do this here, and they knew how to do it in Atlanta, and in Dallas, and in Los Angeles. And then came the massive attack of general amnesia. I know you know what I'm about to say. Yes, these things. Florida changed up the way we were building things. The public realm idea just eroded. Eventually, the public realm idea was kind of thrown out. It had to be reintroduced by the revolutionaries a few decades ago that Brian was describing. And it's not just the strip shopping centers. The custom of building the sociable front porch world also got replaced with this custom. Does it look slightly familiar? Now, the one on the top, of course, more recent, after we decided to enshrine on the fronts of our buildings that which we consider most important to our lives. We love our appliances, don't we? We keep our appliances with us. We love to use them for all kinds of things, and they like keeping them close, right? So we put a button on our dashboard. We press it. A whole big chunk of the wall of our homes rises up so that we can pull inside the building as close as possible to our beds, to our bedside tables, right where you put your phone. Just amazing. While that was all happening, the historic buildings that gave that public realm I was describing its shape were being demolished, or were allowed to crumble, as was the case in this one. And many of those were never replaced, not even yet. Of course, this is not just unique to here. This happened all over. I have a sad, large collection of pictures like this from all over our country. But there's opportunity in this as well. Brian, since you and a lot of your folks in the room are in the real estate business, here's the answer. There's opportunity in this. The realtors know it. We all see it when we vacation in Charleston or Savannah or Paris or wherever you go. If you can recover curb appeal, you can dominate in real estate because it is so scarce, and people will recognize it right away and they will pay you for it. So there was peril and there was inconvenience in the same mix. All these new habits, put us in peril. Florida gets some really bad headlines, but Jacksonville seems to get way more than its share. Not only is the traffic worse than it should be, way worse, in this kind of atomized city of separated parts, but it's also more dangerous. Jacksonville is partly why our state routinely pops up at or near the top of the list of all the states that have the worst track record for killing the most pedestrians in any given year, for having the most bloody crashes and for having the most epic traffic jams. By the way, this is not the sort of headline you really want. And we have got, as a state, to do a better job of that. Now remember the residential street example I showed you a minute ago to describe the public realm? Just compare it to this one. And you're going to say, Victor, those are completely different. It's not the same thing at all. And I'm here to tell you that in the crude tools planners use to regulate development, they are the same. They are precisely the same. The same land use, the same density, the same lot sizes, the same house sizes. But one will make you, let's see if I can bring it up. There's the one from before. One of them will make you feel like walking. And the other one makes you feel like if you aren't driving, you're doing it wrong. And the difference isn't the density or the land use or what's on the future land use map. The difference is the design. Turns out it's also terribly expensive to be as car-brained as we are. This is a great chart to kind of compare location-efficient neighborhoods, and usually in the older parts of town, and our neighbors in the suburbs, where housing costs are often quite comparable, but look how much more expensive it is to move around when you have to have a $12,000 a year or more investment, according to AAA, for each person over age 16. Anybody want to just guess what the U.S. Department of Labor estimates that the average American household spent on transportation in 1900? Just take a wild guess. What percentage of your annual household income? 1%. Precisely correct. 1%. And that's with horses and horse manure and all the problems that come with that. Very expensive. And then there's parking. I snapped this photo from right here from my Atlanta hotel room. And I showed this in Atlanta to kind of make the point of how much of the city had been turned into parking. And one fellow popped up from right about where you're sitting, and he said, hold on a minute here, that's completely wrong. That one in the middle is also parking. And I want to ask you to compare that to the spot we started in on in the old maps. Remember that piece of Bay Street that I zoomed on before? Look at the sort of coverage by buildings that was the common pattern. And now here's Bay Street today, just really close to the same area. And here's a little yellow added on the map. Basically parking stomped on Jacksonville like Godzilla stomped on Tokyo. All right. Time for some optimism, you think? I think so. Yeah, I think so too. I have another theory. And that's because today I spent lunchtime with a bunch of your leaders, and I've spent the last couple of days looking around for again after many years of coming here. And what I see is many, many reasons to be hopeful. There's a lot of evidence of a comeback underway here. In the big projects like the ones that Brian described, and in the little projects, this moment should be your renaissance. For one, you're busy breathing life into old historic buildings, which is just great. I love to see that. That throws off benefits to everyone, to your property values, to your sales taxes, to your quality of life, to your brand. Lots of benefits in historic preservation. I see even more evidence as you slowly, surely build great public spaces and trails, and you're pushing for more. Congratulations, Lindsay, on forming the Parks Alliance. That's pretty exciting stuff. I see evidence as you slowly, surely are building these great public spaces and trails, but also you're building this kind of comeback of mixed uses and transit-supportive, denser developments. That's all pretty cool. Now, I like to think that some of these revived habits aren't just for you inside the old core of the city, but they can expand to all of Duval and to the greater region. Where are you going to build the next great places? Oh, great city building civilization. Surely some of them will be in the center of town, as we've been talking about. And surely others will be in a better grade of new settlements out on the edge of town or in new locations. But a lot of them are going to be, I think, found in retrofitting suburbia. Now, this was a Kmart. Remember Kmart? Remember Sears? Remember Circuit City? Remember Sports Authority? Remember Lennon's? Do I need to keep going? Yeah, okay. You get the point. We actually have lots of room inside the cities we've already started to accommodate a growing population, to have a new and better form of retail and storefront uses that are much more right-sized. Now, as we do this, there are two crucial details that I want to bring to your attention, two crucial pieces to the puzzle. First, you've got to embrace the idea of housing abundance and variety. Your households just do not all have the same size and shape and age and income and interests. So you'll need some large houses, and you'll need some not so big houses. And your old neighborhoods, of course, just provide a perfect textbook on how to do this, a beautiful one, when the not so big houses and the big houses can all be in the same neighborhood. You'll want some repetition, just enough. That's a perfectly normal thing. And you'll want some uniqueness, right? You'll want some small apartment buildings, for example, not just big ones. And you'll want some accessory dwellings. I'll use all those photographs from right here in the surrounding area to make the point that you have had the solutions to housing variety all along, and they're right under your noses, and they all go together beautifully. The accessory dwellings, I think, are a particularly potent tool, and you could have far more of them, but they're not the only one. So are, for example, buildings that look like big houses but actually have 5 or 6 or 8 units in them. That blue building right there is a mansion apartment building. Looks like a mansion, works like a much needed smaller housing form, and makes a great neighbor. My friend Dan Perolic coined the term the missing middle to describe this. The idea of reviving housing variety is often called this, the missing middle, not just including the large lot single family houses over at one end of the spectrum or the big condo towers at the other end, but all of those forms in between, often absent lately. And there are a lot of places where we can do it, lots of different formats for that. We can put them together in cottage courts and pocket neighborhoods like we see so beautifully at Amelia Park. We can introduce and reintroduce live-work units as a normal part of the menu. I've been talking about two crucial details, so here's the second one. Streets. This is the second big crucial detail, street design. I'm a little obsessed with it, so just warning on that. Streets that are places where people want to be. First, they have that shape, like a public room, where the buildings on the side are like its walls, and the cartway and the sidewalks are like its floor, and the street trees overhead are like its ceiling. Second, they feel really good in hot weather and in cold weather and in between, because there's been thought given to how to make us comfortable. And they lead to places where people actually want to go. They're connected to the surrounding world. Just to stay on that one for a second, don't think for a moment that wider and faster roads are the solution to all of life's traffic congestion. Here's the point. 2 two-lane roads will carry a ton more traffic than 1 4-lane road. Let that sink in for a second. 2 two-lane roads and a network like a web where you have lots of intersections and choices carry a lot more traffic than 1 4-lane road like a tree where we all have to come back to the trunk to use the same intersections right when I'm trying to get somewhere. Yeah? Now, fourth, the streets where people want to be have to feel safe. And sometimes, most times, that means small. As for safety, what you need to know is just like small is beautiful, slow is beautiful. Slow is safe. If a motorist, sorry, this is the only math in the whole presentation, I promise. If a motorist collides with a pedestrian and the car is moving at 20 miles an hour or less, there's a fatality 5% of the time. Now, that's still too many. Let's think about that. But 1 in 20 at 20. You speed up just a little bit to 30 miles per hour, and always someone dies 50% of the time. At just 40 miles an hour, the rate is more than 80% of the time. So pop quiz now. You ready for your second pop quiz? Let's say we have 2 streets in a town, and one of them operates at 25 miles per hour, and the other one operates at 40 miles per hour. Okay. Which one will move more cars through a given lane of traffic in a given hour? You knew this was a trick question, right? Okay. It may sound counterintuitive, but we get more efficient movement of a larger number of vehicles at 26.5 miles per hour than we do at faster speeds. You learned this in driver's ed, spread out a little bit, right? The road is wide. You don't ride side by side with the other car. You spread out a little bit. So if you want to Google it for the engineers, this is something called the speed flow capacity diagram. All the traffic engineers learn about it in school, and it's in their manuals. Their professional code of conduct and code of ethics probably says, protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Our U.S. Constitution says this phrase, protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And I would just ask you, how do you think we're doing on that, Florida? Not as well as we should. So safe means designing for everyone. Last, the streets where we want to return to again and again are in some way memorable. That's the Nanjing Road in Shanghai. You don't have to do something quite that elaborate to be memorable. There are lots of ways to satisfy this criterion. All of them involve basically the joy of human creativity put out there, up in our field of vision where we can see it. It might be the landscape design, it might be art, it might be signs, it could be architecture, it could be all those. But the places where people want to be, the memorable places, tend to let us see the ballet of life, going on around us. Memorable streets don't have to be expensive to achieve. This one just required some clever paint choices. Remember, the competition is entirely bland, like I showed in those other photographs, so the bar is really low if you want to beat them on the memorable factor. Now, when you go to that meeting with our friends at the traffic engineers of the Florida Department of Transportation, they will sometimes refer to walking, cycling, and even transit as, and I quote, alternative modes of transportation. Don't fall for it, okay? Walking is the original mode. And if you were looking closely at my historic photographs, there were more bikes than cars historically in our Florida place. So biking is something we can promote far more than we actually do. And other civilizations are getting better and better at this. Many people tell us that they'd be happy to swap some of their car trips for bike trips, but they have a pretty particular requirement. They want there to be a safe, pleasant place to ride. They don't have to fear for their lives to complete their trip. Now, I ride my bike to work. I know that makes me an exception. Our Florida cities sometimes pop up in the national news for having the fastest growing percentage of bike commuters. Did you know that? Miami was #1 for like 5 years in a row. Fastest growing percentage of bike commuters. You have to listen carefully to statistics, because if you start with a sufficiently low number, then it's really easy to get a fast percentage. Okay. But I ride my bike to work, and I just want to ask you, how many of us here can say that their commute home after a hard day at work at the end of their day is the best part of their day? I can say that. I feel pretty fortunate for that. My coworker, Kenneth Garcia, does this too. He drops his daughter off at school on the way. One less car. Our old friend Ian Lockwood, as for school trips, really nailed it with this cartoon. And it might be too small to read, so I'll just, did he get there yet? There it is. There is too much traffic for Billy to walk to school, so we drive him. Traffic-inducing traffic, isn't that great? Now, at this point in a presentation like this, someone always jumps up from the front row and says, "But Victor, we're not Amsterdam." I got news for you. Amsterdam wasn't always Amsterdam. Just take a look, before and after, before and after. They decided to make it that way. Amsterdam wasn't always Amsterdam. So just to conclude my comments about streets, I want to say that the purposes of great streets don't stop with just being ways of moving about from one place to get from here to there, or even just being good addresses for your businesses and homes. They should be places where we want to and can get to know our neighbors. That's how we go from having crowds to communities. If we're going to have the population growth, let's do the latter, right? Turns out daily interaction, look at the top of this chart, daily interaction with other people, even people you don't know, just say good morning to that person. That's a key indicator for longevity and quality of life as we age. It's even more powerful than taking your meds or getting some cardio. Even the people, not just in your close network of friends and family, but the people you just know by their faces. They know your name. They hand you your coffee, say, Nancy, here, and they'll hand you a coffee, and because your name is written on the cup, right? See, I told you, happiness is in the coffee shop. All this is summarized kind of well by my friend writer Angie Schmidt. She wrote, "Driving should be a privilege, walking should be a right." Somehow we've gotten it backwards. Now, if you like the idea of traditional, close-knit, walkable green neighborhoods, I want to show you what you need to tell mayors and city managers and developers and investors. Look how simple this development is. This is one we had a hand in the Low Country in South Carolina. Street-oriented buildings with the stoops within conversation distance of the sidewalks. Those tree-lined sidewalks that then lead to the corner store and the coffee shop. It's truly not complicated. This development that I'm showing you a couple pictures of here is not fundamentally denser or different in land use than its immediate neighbors, but it is more valuable, and the difference is the design. We can put that into a chart. And Lindsay, at lunch I mentioned this chart, so I put this here for you. Let me back that up. There we go. This is the chart or map that you need to show your leaders. In this map, the areas where there's more property tax collected each year have taller spikes. So what you're seeing is a visualization essentially of property value, the tax base for our ad valorem taxes, that cause a greater amount of revenue per acre per year to flow in to all of government. On the upper left, over here, that's the beach in this example. Those are the views that the Almighty created. Center right, near the top, that's historic Charleston. You know, they've been building charm on top of charm for 300 years and got better at it during Mayor Riley's tenure. And in the middle, that's the new development that I just showed you pictures of. It's called Ion. If you want to balance the budget, you want to put new tires on a school bus, or you want to put a new roof on City Hall or run a great parks department, you need some spikes. So we don't apologize for trying to make things more valuable by design. Let me end by saying we shouldn't fight the last war. We should plan for the coming era. The household needs are for much more housing variety than Ozzie and Harriet expected in the 1950s sitcom. It's also going to be a period in which there's going to be a lot more automation. We'll have a lot more people working from home. And of course, there will be revolutions upon revolutions in transportation technology. But I'm encouraged by all those because I think that they mean your great city building civilization is back in the game. You just have to give yourselves permission to choose it. You have to choose your future. Thank you very much.